do you think of Nickelodeon? We are fans, but we can't help but feel that there's something wrong with the station. We think that it has seen better days, and we want something to be done about it. Be sure to stay to the end, because there's 2 words Nickelodeon needs to bear in mind so it can be the station we know it can be. If you haven't visited the things before, then do us a favor. Give this video a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. Today, we're going to talk about everything wrong with Nickelodeon. If we're going to look at what's wrong with Nickelodeon, then it's only fair and it's only sensible if we take a look at what used to be right with it. Back in the 1980s, the 1990s, and the 2000s, it was the go-to channel for any child with an interest in watching TV. Pretty much 90% of classic American and Canadian kids' television from that era was on Nickelodeon, and it was a big part of a lot of people's lives growing up. But now it's less so. One of the problems that a lot of people have with it is how repetitive the programming is. Listen, we love Spongebob Squarepants, we really do. The thing is, though, we don't quite love it so much that it's the only thing we want to watch ever, and sometimes Nickelodeon can feel a bit like that. There's a reliance on repeats of that show that it can be a bit like eating a 10-pound bag of candy. It's great, but you can't help but feel that it's all a bit too much. Now, we'll admit that Nickelodeon isn't the only channel with this problem. The same sort of thing can be said about how much Cartoon Network broadcasts Teen Titans Go, for instance. And we think we'd rather watch Spongebob Squarepants than Teen Titans Go, but that isn't the point. Firstly, just because another channel is making a mistake, there's no reason for Nickelodeon to make pretty much the same one. Secondly, Spongebob Squarepants started in 1999, while Teen Titans Go premiered in 2013. So there's actually more of a likelihood that people will be more familiar, and familiarity can, sadly, breed contempt with Nickelodeon's show than Cartoon Network's. It's a bit too much like Spongebob Squarepants is Nickelodeon, and Nickelodeon is Spongebob Squarepants. What we would suggest is that Nickelodeon should maybe start to mix up its programming a bit more. Ideally, we'd love for it to start making shows that will become classics again, but that may not be strictly necessary, at least in the short term. It could delve back into 40 years of great children's television and introduce some classic shows to a whole new generation. Either way, we think that a freshening up of the schedules is something that's needed, because relying on one show, no matter how brilliant and iconic it may be, is a recipe for disaster. People are always looking for a bit of variety, and that's something that we think is a little bit lacking from Nickelodeon's schedules. Another thing that didn't help the way things were going for the channel was the closure of Nickelodeon magazine in 2009. The magazine itself was really popular. It wasn't just tie-in after tie-in. There were interesting and informative pieces that were relevant to children. An issue might contain some cool recipes or an enlightening piece of nonfiction writing, but regardless of that, it did something else. It grew the brand. Now Nickelodeon wasn't just something that kept young kids entertained on the television, it was something that enriched their lives and maybe got them into reading too. So that, in turn, meant that parents might be a little more welcoming towards the channel. And it also meant that children were more inclined to develop a kind of brand loyalty to the station and its offshoots. People talk about how the magazine, which came out every month and was heavily advertised, actually kickstarted a lifelong love of reading. However, declining sales and a tendency for old school media to make more use of online sounded the death knell for the magazine, so it closed in 2009. However, nothing really took its place. Parents who were fine with letting their offspring read a magazine were somewhat wary about letting their kids loose on the internet and checking out the Nickelodeon website. So while the site had hits, there would have been people who read the printed product and never migrated online. It looked as if Nickelodeon magazine would be reborn in 2015, but it wasn't the same, and that closed after less than a year. Did you know that members of the public used to be able to go into the Nickelodeon Studios? That's right, and that was also a part of the channel's success. They were located in Orlando, Florida, USA, and they were part of the station's iconography. Back when the channel used to host a lot of things like game shows and shows filmed in front of a live studio audience, being part of the Universal Studios theme park didn't do it any harm either. If you were a kid on holiday in the area, the chances were that you would swing by the Nickelodeon Studios while you were there, and you'd get the chance to see shows being made, and that meant that you'd feel a connection with the channel. But by the time the early noughties rolled around, things were, sadly, different. There was a move away from the likes of Clarissa Explains It All, Super Sloppy Double Dare, Wienerville, and What Would You Do, to programs that required a closed set to make. It wasn't just a TV station, it was a place you could check out and experience while you were on vacation too. If you were lucky enough to go to Nickelodeon Studios, you'll know exactly what we're talking about. But sadly, it closed in 2005 and now stands home to the Blue Man group of performers, but nothing has replaced it. We know exactly how powerful the link between a place and a media brand can be, so kids today aren't lucky enough to be able to dream of paying a visit to Nickelodeon Studios. For them, Nickelodeon is just another TV station showing some programs they like. There's no world building. While we know TV has changed since the 1990s, here's here's an idea, bring back the idea of the Nickelodeon Studios. It just might work. Perhaps one of Nickelodeon's biggest mistakes can be illustrated using just one show. Back in the 1990s, Doug was a big deal for kids across the US and Canada. The tales of every kid character Doug Funny, his crush on Patty Mayonnaise, and life in the town of Bluffington entertained kids and charmed adults too. You know Charlie Brown from the Peanuts cartoons? Well, the character of Doug was a bit like him. He was the lovable, down-on-his-luck type. And when it was launched, it joined Rugrats and the Ren and Stimpy show as one of Nickelodeon's very first original cartoons. Now, despite being popular and well-received critically, Nickelodeon declined to renew it in 1993, saying that it was too expensive to make. So once the contract ran out, the show's creator, Jim Jenkins, decided that if Nickelodeon didn't want it, then someone else should. That someone was Disney. That's right, Nickelodeon allowed a highly popular show first to stop being made. Then, when they could have taken a break and just made fewer episodes, they allowed the creator to move it on. So what happened was that one of Nickelodeon's biggest rivals got one of the station's most popular shows. When you think about it, it's pretty rare that a program changes networks, but Nickelodeon allowed it to happen. We're sure that Jim Jenkins might well have allowed more Doug to be made, even if it was at a slower pace. It shows a channel that is willing to let something that entertains viewers and keeps them watching to wither away. So if you remember Doug and you loved it, you might not be able to quite pinpoint which channel it was on. It's that thing about brand loyalty again. If you aren't 100% sure which station a show was on, then you might not feel the same way about the station it was on, if you see what we mean. When people think of Nickelodeon, there's one thing that quite often pops into their heads. Can you guess what that might be? Well, the thing that we're thinking of right now is that classic logo. It's orange, it's got white writing, and it's shaped like a range of things, but mainly a splatter. When the station was first set up in the late 1970s, it went through a whole range of different logos as it started to find its own identity. Incidentally, did you know that the station wasn't originally called Nickelodeon? When it was first set up in 1977, it was called Pinwheel, after the show for preschoolers that was a staple of its programming. It wasn't until 1979 that it got the name we all know and love today, but it wasn't until 1985 the iconic logo came into being. Unfortunately, it changed to a more pointed, stylized logo in 2009. That might sound like a minor thing, but it really isn't. You see, there was a certain sort of genius in the classic Nickelodeon logo. When designers Tom Corey and Scott Nash designed it, they deliberately made it orange. That's because orange clashes with pretty much every other color, so they wanted it to stand out from the crowd, and the splat could be turned into pretty much everything that you wanted. This fit in with the ethos of variety that Nickelodeon brought to the table. Interestingly, network bosses wanted to rebrand the station as Nick, but the people responsible for ordering the logo put their feet down. They thought it sounded too much like a garage mechanic. But the logo kind of fit in with a golden age of American kids TV, and again, it brought about brand loyalty. People knew what the logo was, what it meant, and what it was associated with. The creative team behind commissioning the logo didn't want to tell people that the station was fun, they wanted it to be fun, and the logo was part of that. Now let's be honest here, do you get that from the current Nickelodeon logo? We don't, and we'll bet that it doesn't sit in people's hearts and minds in the way that the old one did either. So yet again, there was something that fostered a kind of loyalty towards the Nickelodeon brand in a way that the current one doesn't. We'd suggest a return to the old logo. It was the station's ethos exemplified. We also need to have a little mention of the key thing about what makes any TV channel great, the shows. Nickelodeon, as we have seen, has more than enough great examples of those. When you think about some of the great programs that it used to show back in the day, not just the big hitters like Kenan and Kel, Clarissa Explains It All, and the Ren and Stimpy show, but also its wide range of game shows, you think of quality and you think of Nickelodeon. While there are still some great shows being made, we absolutely adore the Loud House, and we think that you do too. There's a lack of things coming through to enthrall the latest generation of young minds in any great volume. Part of that might be down to a lack of talent coming through, but it might be more likely that there's a lack of willingness to take risks. The sort of risks that will get people to develop a brand loyalty towards Nickelodeon. We aren't saying these things because we hate Nickelodeon and we don't care what happens to it. We are saying these things because we love Nickelodeon. At least we love what it used to be, and we want other people to love it too. It doesn't take much. All it needs is for someone to expand what the channel does and use those things as a way to bring up that brand loyalty. Just think of how many things outside of TV and film you can associate with, for example, Disney, and you'll know what we are talking about. But we think we might have spoken for too long enough. Do you think there are things wrong with Nickelodeon? And if so, how would you fix them? Don't be shy. Go ahead and let us know what it is that you think in the comments. And that's it for Everything Wrong with Nickelodeon. If you liked it, then check out 5 cartoon reboots that are way better than the original. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.